The news that inequality in education is worse than it was 40 years ago, with the East Midlands once again coming near the bottom of the pile. A report by the Social Market Foundation found that where you live in the country has a big impact on how well you're likely to do at school. And the East Midlands came second bottom across the country for educational achievement. So, Andrew, depressing news again on education for the East Midlands. This research has been done for the Commission chaired by former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, and it says that the East Midlands has persistently underperformed. It's damning, isn't it?
I think this report helps us guard against complacency, but there's a lot of good news in schools.
It certainly does that. It couldn't be worse, could it?
It could be worse. I mean, actually, if you look at the figures from 1970 on the same measure, the East Midlands was bottom then as well. And yet, since then, there's been huge improvements in the achievements of children in the East Midlands across several governments, and particularly with the push and the emphasis on education that this government's given. So,
what is your party going to do about this? Because these aren't figures to be proud of, are they?
What the government has done and will continue to do is focus on core standards. There's been recent announcements about focusing on that basic level of learning, improve the ability of teachers to teach resilience and character in schools, and also I would say that there are 1 million more pupils in schools in this country now, in schools that are either good or outstanding since 2010. So, yes, we mustn't be complacent. There is more to do.
There are some improvements.
But there's some good news as well.
OK. Vernon, the survey found that 63% of pupils in our region got 5 good GCSE grades, compared with 70% in London. But in some areas, it's even worse than that. And last year, Nottingham had the worst results in the country, with just 41% of pupils getting those 5 good GCSEs.
I think obviously there have been some improvements in our region, but clearly when you have any survey, you need to look at what that survey is telling you and try to find out what are the causes of that.
It's telling us it's not good here in the East Midlands.
Well, they're saying compared to other regions
yeah.
that there is an issue with respect to the East Midlands. Is it location? Are there issues around deprivation? What I'm always concerned about, and I think what is interesting, is what we do about it. And I think if you look across the region, the authorities and the schools, I think what you see is that some schools doing remarkably well, others not doing so well. And it's how you bring everybody up to the same standards. There's a lot of effort now in good schools partnering with schools which are weaker to try and improve those standards.
OK, well, next, the EU. What has it ever done for us? The referendum on membership looks set to be the biggest political issue this year. In a moment, we'll be looking at our own poll of the way MPs will be voting. But first, our political editor, Tony Rowe, on what in or out means for us here in the East Midlands.
It's not high noon for the EU debate, but it's getting closer. On each side of the divide are 2 brothers, each with their own business in Nottingham on either side of the ring road. One says business would be better off in the EU. The other is fed up with the bureaucracy and wants out.
We've got a local business here, Toyota, coming out yesterday saying that it will make no difference to them. No difference to the jobs, no difference to investment.
The fact is, you'll have to have customs clearance every time you want to move one of their cars to
but
the
you're
continent.
overplaying that.
It's going to slow the process down.
You and I both know that's not as onerous as you're making it sound.
The enterprise partnership responsible for promoting jobs and growth in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire says the European Union does have too much red tape, but there has been investment here.
There is a challenge about red tape and a very heavy administrative burden, but there have been important investments using European money to help the growth of Nottingham. So one of the examples is over in Sneinton. There's some money for their town centre improvements. About £800,000 worth of funding from the EU came there. Over here, we can see the BioCity project, which is an important project for Nottingham.
The UK has Europe's biggest aerospace industry, second in the world to the US. EU money helps research at the University of Nottingham.
We are one of the biggest academic players in Europe, and this affords the opportunity for us to work with industry giants such as Libre Aerospace in Germany, Airbus or Dassault Aviation in France, for example.
It's the loss of influence and that leading role in research they fear if we leave the EU.
It will also isolate us in terms of the research network and indeed on the long run that would affect our ability to innovate for the industry.
Back on the bridge which divides opinion, one view is too much is put into the EU with too little back for Britain. whatever the investment here.
I'm for leaving, really. The cost is too expensive. The European Union machine is broken. I don't buy the fears that Ian strikes into people on trade. Trade will continue.
Europe is 45% of our export business. I'm in the European freight business, and I know the damage that will happen to our exports if we leave the European Union.
Ian, you don't really believe in the EU. That's something I know historically. And you don't believe that it will survive in any event. I believe that we now need to take this once in a generation opportunity to take ourselves out of it. We still need to be friends, we still need to cooperate, we still need to trade, but we can save a huge amount of money. £350 million a week we're spending, over £1 billion going from the East Midlands annually.
Sibling rivalry then, but still friends, whatever happens after the vote. That could be a bigger challenge for politicians in the same parties who disagree.
Well, we're joined now by Margo Parker, one of 2 UKIP MEPs for the East Midlands. Margo, in Tony's report there, we saw some of the funding projects that the EU has paid for here in the East Midlands, and £315 million of European money will be coming to the East Midlands over the next 4 years. What happens to that huge pot of money if we leave? That's a lot to lose.
Well, I prefer to look at it in a more positive way. There's £55 million every day that we give to the EU. So you can see that we're giving a huge amount. Secondly, we'd like the freedom so that small businesses can trade without the red tape that the EU burdens them with. We actually buy more from the EU than they sell us. We're trading constantly with the rest of the world in a much more meaningful way.
Well, what do you say to people like the professor at the University of Nottingham there who said that he fears that we're going to lose influence and the ability to work with these big European manufacturing giants that we depend on? Our innovation would be stifled, and that's one thing really that we can't put a price on.
No, I don't believe that at all. I think that's looking rather narrow. Of course, you look at Toyota, who are saying, well, we're going to remain anyway, whether you're in or out. So you don't need to be in a political union to be able to have...
That's just one business, a big business nonetheless, but it's just one big business.
Yes, we've got JCB, we've got Silver Cross Prams, there are lots of small companies that find it very, very difficult. So by all means, you don't need that political union. I mean, there are 13 trade associations throughout the world. Only the EU is a political union. You do not need to be in a political union to trade. I do not believe that universities would have a problem. We'd still be innovative, still be good neighbours, still be able to work together.
Andrew Lewer, what do you think? Should we stay in?
I think we need to wait to the results of the European Council discussion. But what Margo says is absolutely right about this money from Europe coming to Britain.
Why do we need to wait for that? What difference will it make?
Because there's a renegotiation process underway. And one of the things it could well look at is this idea of European money coming backwards and forwards. In terms of regional development, infrastructure investment's important, but we don't actually need the European Commission telling us how to do it, especially when we are large-scale net contributors. There are other areas, and university cooperation is one of them, where whilst it's not necessary for that to happen within the EU, universities do cooperate well within the EU. Horizon 2020, which is the big research programme across Europe, is not so much important for the sums of money for Britain, but the fact that it creates a network that helps them produce some results.
Vernon Coker, what do you think?
I think the EU is of massive benefit to our country. Countless numbers of jobs, billions of pounds worth of investment. We're part of a big organisation that gives us global clout. And the idea, as Margo says, that somehow you can leave that and have no consequence and it'll be far better, is a myth. I mean, if you look at Norway, which is often used as the example, there's a country outside of the EU, that Norway has to come to an agreement with the EU and pays into the EU, but has no influence on it. It's not at the top table. No say at all.
It's got a point,
and
hasn't
it actually still got all the problems that other countries have. It's absolutely the case.
It's not.
Absolutely
They pay as much per
not.
head as we do to be in the EU.
They have a sovereign wealth.
But they have no say in what happens.
One of the rich, yes, they do. It is one of the richest countries in Europe. Switzerland is another very wealthy country. I know where I'd rather be. I'd rather have the freedom.
Has to accept freedom of movement.
Some of it, yes, but there's another point. Freedom of movement is a massive difficulty.
It has to accept the services agreements with the EU.
Difficult problem.
To accept services.
Yeah, but you can still trade. You don't have to be shackled.
Well, look, I'm one of these people who doesn't believe that if we left the EU, the sun would shine every day and all would be wonderful. And I'm not one of these people who believes that if we stayed in the EU, you know, leaving the EU is a disaster, staying in the EU is wonderful. It isn't either of those things. It's a nuanced decision that we have to make on balance, whether it's better for us or not. There are huge consequences, but I don't think
what's your gut feeling?
either side
you say you want to wait for this renegotiation.
You
know, what's your gut feeling? I mean, you work in Europe.
My feeling is that if we don't have fundamental change coming out of that European Council meeting, on balance, we'd be better leaving.
OK, well, we've heard the views here in the studio, but how will our East Midlands MPs vote on this issue? And are they for staying in or coming out? We've been conducting our very own poll. Not everyone has replied, but of those that did, all 9 East Midlands Labour MPs who responded say they will be voting to stay in the European Union. It's a different story from the Conservatives. So far, just one has replied with a yes to staying in. No surprise, perhaps, that was Ken Clarke. 7 of our Conservatives tell us they're waiting for the outcome of the renegotiations before making their minds up. And 2, Heather Wheeler and Andrew Bridgens, say they have already decided to vote to come out. And you can see that poll on our Twitter and Facebook pages. We'll also be able to update it if any of our other MPs do make their positions known. Andrew, as you can see, we haven't heard from all our MPs yet, but there are some very interesting details already there, and a strong Eurosceptic strain among East Midlands Conservatives. 2 MPs already saying that they definitely want out.
Yeah, and the East Midlands, certainly in terms of its Conservative MPs, has always tended to have that tradition.
They're not going to wait for renegotiations. They say they know already.
They're not. I mean, I met with the Prime Minister the other week to talk about this with some of my colleagues. We do need to take a view on what comes out of there, and if there are some significant changes as a result of the detailed negotiations, there's more in the detail, not just more detail, then that's the time to make a decision. We've managed to stay united as a party, even though we've disagreed about this issue, and that's important as well, particularly when there's so much other political disagreement going on and disunity. We've held it together pretty much, and I think we'll still be able to do when we get these results.
Margo, at the end of the day, we all get a vote in this, don't we, so that the public will decide what it wants. But a lot of Conservative MPs, as we've just heard, are waiting to see if David Cameron can renegotiate a deal. Is there any deal that could be struck that would make you think that it was actually worth staying in the EU for?
Well, Maury, he hasn't asked for anything, so he isn't going to get anything. We're not going to get control of our borders. These are very critically important.
So it would have to be something like that would
it's a
change
very
things
important
for you.
thing, absolutely. But, you know, we're not going to get it. We've never had any chance of actually being able to make any changes. You know, for 40 years, they've carried along with their juggernaut. And, you know, we didn't even have a chance, as you well know, whether we had the right to be able to vote for Mr. Juncker. He was put in place. We had no choice about that. So Europe doesn't do choice. It's not a democratic organisation. If you're a federalist, then Europe's for you. If you believe in the democracy and bring the lawmaking back to Westminster, to these good people, then you have to vote to leave.
Vernon Coker, all 9 Labour MPs who got back in touch with us, including you, said that they want to stay in the EU. But Jeremy Corbyn has had his doubts. Are you totally committed as a party now?
Yeah, we are totally committed as a party to stay in the European Union. We will campaign for a yes vote with respect to the EU. We believe it's in our interest, it's in our trading interests, it's also in our interests in other areas in terms of security and all of those things working together as a set of European countries gives us a say in the world which we wouldn't have. It's not about giving up our sovereignty, it's about staying together and gives us a bigger voice. And we can hear, and the debate will commence, but as I say, the big question will be those countries who stay outside of the EU, like Norway, like Turkey, like Switzerland, all of those have to come to agreements with the EU.
Another question is, I guess, what happens to UKIP? Because once this is done with, the EU and Europe questions dealt with, what happens to you? What happens to the party?
No, we had a great manifesto last year. We're building on that, and don't forget we took votes.
So it's just business as usual then?
Absolutely, we carry on.
On what? On what issues are we campaigning?
All of the issues that bother all of these parties. We're standing here for ordinary British people.
But if we
we
pull
want to
out
make
of
sure
Europe?
jobs. Oh, of course you can manage without Europe. We want to trade with the rest.
What will UKIP be for then?
Oh, no, it's not just Europe. I mean, we're trying to bring jobs, manufacturing. We want great education. We want an NHS that works. We want want that money back because we believe the British people can spend that money in a much more opportune way than presently is the case.
Margo Parker, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, how much will you be paying this year in council tax? The answer, it seems, is a lot more than last year. In his autumn statement, the Chancellor allowed local authorities to add an extra 2% to council tax to fund improvements to adult social care, and it looks like most of them are grabbing that opportunity. Here's political reporter Tim Parker.
They might have been Tory blue for generations in rural areas and market towns like Harborough in South Leicestershire, but it's not protecting them from more savage council cuts.
The government previously restricted authorities to council tax rises of just under 2%, but now recognises that more money's needed to look after a growing older population.
The government have also said to us, because we're a social care authority, that we're allowed to increase the council tax by a further 2% to pay for adult social care. So add the two together and it comes to 3.99.
Is that enough to cover the demand in adult social care?
No, it isn't, and which is why we have to make some reductions in the service as well. People are being, and I've made no secret about this, they're going to be asked to pay more but get less.
And that means council tax will be going up by the maximum allowed right across our region. By 3.99% in Leicestershire and in Leicester City, up by 3.95% in Nottingham and 4% in Derby. Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire are still putting their proposals together. It means in Leicestershire you'll pay £43.25 a year more on a Band D property from April.
You keep getting less and less for your money. You know, I don't reduce your council tax and you get less services for it all the while, and just think it's totally wrong, really.
Not very pleasing at all, don't like it.
So I have an elderly mother and she has carers. It's a problem, you know, to keep these services going.
I'm concerned about care for elderly people, social care and that sort of thing. And whilst we've all got to live within our means, it doesn't seem right if we're expected to pay more and then not get as much good services on that.
All our councils say they're facing more demand for services, and that means wherever you live in the East Midlands, your local council is asking you to pay more council tax.
Andrew Lewer, you were a leader of Derbyshire County Council, so you know the way that local government works and the difficulties that they're currently facing. So tax rises are never popular, but councils now say they have no choice.
In terms of adult care, I think the increased flexibility the government's given to pay for some of those adult care costs is an important step in the right direction. But ever since the 1990s, across successive governments, there's been a need to better integrate adult care with NHS work. And so this is a step in the right direction, but there does remain a lot more to do with this. It's a massive question for our society, how we're going to deal with dementia. This is a step in the right direction to have this extra money available, but there needs to be more done in terms of...
Are the rises too high?
Not for social care. That levy, I think, is available. I think there's a huge demand that needs to be met, but it needs innovation and working together.
But the reason, of course, the councils are saying that they need to fund this and find extra money is because your government's not giving them the money. You're taking it away from them.
We've just had a general election and people have made a decision about the size of the state, the overall tax burden they want. But in terms of where it has to be focused, better working together and new structures for dementia care in particular are critical on top of this step in the right direction.
OK, well, Vernon, it isn't just big councils. Many of our smaller ones too, even down to parish councils, are raising their tax rates. And there could be bigger bills from the police and fire and rescue services too. We could all be paying a lot more.
Well, what you're seeing is massive cuts in central government funding of local authorities, and local authorities of all colours having to try and make up that shortfall by increasing their own rates as much as they can. So you'll see the 2% levy, for example, with respect to adult social care. That's an example of the government saying, we're not funding it, it's up to you, and passing the burden and the buck, if you like, onto local authorities.
Taxpayers pay for it, whether it's central or local.
It should be centrally funded, though. Something as important as adult social care should not be down to the lottery of local funding. The central government have a responsibility to ensure that our elderly, our most frail and vulnerable people, are properly cared for. even with that increase, the Association of the Directors of Adult Services say that there will still be a massive shortfall. That is not acceptable, and something should be done about it.
Well, Vernon, you've always been a supporter of local government and the concept of local government autonomy. So I don't think whenever there's a big societal problem, the answer is always the central state. I think local government can adapt to its local circumstances and does need to work in new structures to get this sorted out.
Tax rises are going to make a difference. Individually, they might not seem like huge rises, but an average of an extra £43 a year in Leicestershire, for example.
I wouldn't underestimate the benefit on people's back pockets of levies like this, but people know there's a dementia problem.
Well, it's a hit, isn't it? It's not a benefit.
There's a dementia problem
hit
across the Western world, and in Britain in particular, our dementia rates are very high. So this particular issue, quite apart from the bottom line, does need structural change to be dealt with.
There's a difference between yourself and me. I think the
there
central
is.
government
We'll have to
should
leave
fund
it there.
the proper funding of adult social care.